Welcome. It's Writer's Dream Time. I'm Linda Maria Frank. I am the author of Annie Tillery Mysteries. Our show today is dedicated to poetry and to the poets of Long Island. So I'd like to introduce you to our guest, Mary Healey, who is a Long Island poet. And she's going to tell us all about the ins and outs of writing poetry, being inspired, reading poetry, publishing poetry, and becoming a famous poet.
Da-da-da-da.
And from my mouth to God's ears, Mary, right?
Exactly.
So welcome, Mary.
Thank you very much, Linda. It's lovely
What
to be here.
has inspired you to write poetry and not mysteries and spy fiction?
You know, I don't know. I never thought that I'd write poetry. I never thought that would be something I'd be interested in.
I never thought I was going to be a writer, so that makes two of us.
But I think it just was the perfect fit for me, poetry. I like the idea. I write very minimalistic. I love the idea of it. I love getting that point across. It can be, and you can form it in so many different ways. You can tell a story, you can just speak of nature, you can do haikus, it's all of that. And I think that's what makes it special.
See, I think that I should try to write poetry. And the reason why is because I like that whole idea of it's short. I mean, you know, you can write the Iliad, but still you can put your thoughts down. But I have a really hard time. I don't think I have the lyrical gene. I don't sing. I can't carry a tune.
I don't know if that matters.
Yeah, but there's that rhythm to it.
No, I don't. Well, I don't think of it like that. You know what? But I do think that there's a huge leap between writing fiction and writing a poem, because to write it condensed is one thing, and people can say, well, you know, it's an easy thing to do. It's not, because you have to choose every word so carefully, because to get that whatever that point is to you across.
Sure, it's crystallizing what I say in 3 paragraphs in 5 lines or 6
right.
lines.
That's right. That's
yeah.
right.
No, I think that's true. So what kind of poetry do you write? All kinds, right?
I write all kinds of poetry, but it's usually in a free verse style. I like writing that way. I've tried writing other things. I've tried writing form poetry, but I think I'm at my best when I write freestyle. And as I said, I write very minimalistic. And between those two, between the freestyle and the minimalistic, that's really kind of where I fall.
Now, some people write poetry about nature. Different things seem to inspire different poets. What can you say specifically, or just generally, what inspires you? What kind of things in life really get you going to write your thoughts down, your emotions?
It can be a thought. It can be something you've passed by. I was going to a workshop one day, and I passed a crow, and it came. And you get ideas from it, or someone says something, or a lot of times I listen to a lot of music, I listen to like FUV, and they play a lot of folk and a lot of different types of music. And you hear something, or you hear a line, and you think, oh, that sounds really great. And it's not even the line you think you hear. It's something beyond, and it's sort of, and that's how it starts, the process for me. And it's just a matter of just sitting down and writing it. I'm not somebody who belabors over it. I don't keep going over it. I just, when I write it, it's pretty much that's it.
Yeah, this is pretty much the same question that people ask of authors who write fiction. Well, not so much nonfiction, because nonfiction is nonfiction. Not to denigrate it, but it's nonfiction. It's factual. But oftentimes people ask fiction writers. I get this question all the time: where do you get your ideas from? And that is the hardest question to answer.
I think too, people are, you know, it's like a magician revealing their secrets. I remember there was a writers group on Long Island, and when I became a member, they have you come up to the podium and you talk, and they ask you that question. And I remember it was this poem that I got the idea from. I was watching this Discovery Channel, and they were saying as you breathe and you exhale, it just travels all over the country. So I was thinking that the breath that I might be breathing in might be from Julius Caesar, or, you know, it could be all these different people that it circles and circles. And I remember I was saying that, and I lost the audience. All of a sudden, they just dropped off, and it's like, because sometimes revealing too much, people don't want to know that either. Or they want to know some fabulous thing that you're going to tell them that's going to be a total lie.
Yeah.
But they're going to grab a hold of that. They want to hear that. I found that dollar on the street. No, I fought an old man for it. Much more interesting. Nobody.
Sure. Well, that's what I always, anyone who I ever knew who was a friend of mine or a relative, if they got an injury, I told them, well, make up a good story about how you got it. Don't tell them you tripped over the sidewalk. You were attacked by pirates or something, you know. Yeah, it's.
There you go.
But I think, I do think that I find it very hard to answer that question, where do I get my ideas from? Because it's, the way the human brain works and the way the human brain takes in information, processes it, and then recombines it. It's like alphabet soup to me. And then it comes out as something totally different. And it can be triggered by a smell. It can be triggered, oh, let me use the word odor, that's better. It can be triggered by something that you see, something, music that you hear. It's amazing how, that's how I find it. I find that what comes out of my head, being stimulated by something around me as an idea for something, is amazing. And I can't say exactly where it comes from, except to say, what I say to kids is, well, you know, you're sitting and you're watching the guy across the street drag his garbage to the curb, okay? And then all of a sudden, while you're watching him, some stuff in your head collides, some ideas in your head collides, and all of a sudden an idea comes up. And because I don't know how else to say that, where ideas come from.
And then the idea that you see, the idea that is in your brain, and then the idea that comes out from the hand are three things. And then you look at the paper and you're like, I really sometimes step back and I think to myself, I'm surprised that I wrote this, that this really came from me. It's a very organic process, but it's also a very interesting process, and it's very personal. Oh, yeah. Everybody's different. Everybody, some people like to talk about it, some people don't. A lot of times on poetry, when people come up, and sometimes it's new people, but sometimes it's like, and they stand up and they're reading their 2 or 3 poems at an open read, and they're, you know, they're telling these huge stories, and sometimes the stories are better than the poems, and sometimes it's better not to reveal as much, because then it's universal. For my poetry, I like that, because I might write it with an idea in my mind, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the idea that you get from it or you get from it. You know, everybody gets something a little different from it, and I think that's what makes it stick.
Yeah, I agree with you, because in writing my books, which are very descriptive, there are some things I don't want to describe because I want the reader to come up with their own idea. And if I describe it in detail, for instance, they keep asking me to describe the main character, and I try to keep the details of her physical appearance, which I don't really know what they are, because I've never seen her.
Right, right.
I've seen the illustrations, but is that really her? I keep that to a bare minimum, because I want the people who read it to make up their own picture of my main character. So it's the same thing. Now, I found something about poetry that I like to read, and it is completely different from what we've been saying. It's saying that the poem doesn't come from the brain of the poet. And I read this in a book called Ireland by Frank Delaney, and it's actually a history of Ireland from the standpoint of a storyteller. So this is what he says about poems. As you probably know, nobody can actually write a poem. There is no such act as writing a poem. That's not how poems are made. Oh yes, there's the physical business of pen, ink, and paper, but that isn't whence the poem comes, nor may you send out and fetch a poem from where it's been living. No, like it or not, or like it not, you have to wait for a poem to arrive. The people we call poets, by which I mean true, real poets, they're merely very keen listeners who've learned to recognize when a poem's dropping by. Then they copy down what the poem's telling them in their heads. After that, they tidy up the writing, ask their wives, sisters, or daughters to type it out for them, and so the poem's finished. next to be seen on the pages of some august publication in the Northern Hemisphere, where they pay you minus tuppence per line and hope you don't visit them visit them naked, roaring for more cash. The thing about true poets is they never have to wait. Some people are born lucky. They long to eat a hazelnut, and the next thing, a man walks past their front door with a bag of nuts, and he offers them one. Or a woman who likes the fruit called mango stands at her window, and below in the street she sees a dark and handsome stranger who holds up his hand and offers her the only mango this side of Rangoon. Poets are like that with poems. No sooner do they listen out than a poem swoops down, whispers something to the top of their heads, and they feel it flowing down into their brain, down along their arm, into their fingers, and out onto the page in black letters. And poems are like angels. They visit often, but you've to be watching out for them, and you've to believe in them to benefit from their gifts. Ireland has a great many poets because we've a quiet country here, the empty fields and silent lanes, where it's very easy to hear poems when they come by. That's very Irish.
I'm Irish, and
I know you are.
the only thing I have question is, has he ever written a poem?
I don't know.
I mean, it's a lot to say about poetry unless you've written a poem.
It's very fanciful.
It is. I don't know. I know a lot of people that labor over poetry when they write it, and it doesn't seem to come as with a mango.
Yeah, well, I think he's really basically talking about the idea floating by, but it's, yeah.
I think that, you know, I don't know if you
Right
had
to Frank Delaney.
three fiction writers and you had 3 poets and shorts and all these other things. It's everybody has their own demons and their own angels or whatever you want to call it, you know, that in between. And it's just as difficult. It really is. I don't know. I disagree with it. I understand the floralness of it, but I disagree with the idea of it. Let's come and write a poem and it's walk in the shoes.
Okay, yeah, I'm not a poet, so I just read this and I thought it was very beautiful. But I also like the line about find your wife or daughter or sister to type in.
Okay. I have a short break on that thought. I can tell you that when I first started writing, I did a lot of it at work, a lot. So I would hide it in between blotters and in my office and in between all the different little things and stuff. And I remember people finding it in folders, having to explain it later. That's not cool. But I used to I would call. And this is when cable just started to let people know when someone was calling, it would come up with the person's phone number when you picked up the phone to see it. And I would call and be like, Mom, I have a great idea for a poem. Let me just read you the first 3 lines. Shh. And if I hang up, you'll know that my boss is standing behind me. So I would do it. And so people would stop picking up their phones between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. if they saw it was me, unless it was some type of an emergency or something, because they didn't want to hear what my new poem was going to be about. I stopped doing that after a while. That was when you go to workshops and someone says to you, you read your poem, and they're like, that was a great poem, but you know what? The first 2 lines, I would cut that. I would say this out. This sounds like a darling. This sounds like this. So I'd go home and I'd write, oh, what did she say? I'll take this out, rewrite it. Then after a while, you realize, and you kind of take responsibility for the poetry yourself, and you kind of you do your own thing, and and that's just.
So now, when you started to write poetry, did you get involved in poetry circles, poetry writing groups?
Yes.
And because the reason why I'm asking this, because I know that you did this, is because the people who watch the show really want to know how to go from point A to point B to point C with their writing. So I'm thinking in terms of how did you, once you started to write your poetry, what did you do next? What did you do next? And that.
Well, I started off going to Farmingdale, to the Lair Library. I started doing a workshop there, and they have 2 sets of workshops, and they have every Wednesdays. Either it's a fiction writer's workshop, or writer's workshop, where you can do all nonfiction, fiction, whatever. And then there's a poetry the next Wednesday. So it's each opposite Wednesdays. And I started there. And then when you met people, I got on different websites. I found out there was lots of different readings, libraries. There's a different poetry community. There's the PPA Poetry Associations, North Shore Poetry, all the different poetry associations, and I got involved with those, just going to different readings at Barnes & Noble and Borders when they used to have it there, and the libraries had them. And I was asked, worked at a North Village bookshop in Rockville Center for a couple of years. It was a bookstore, small bookstore, and they had poetry readings monthly, and I hosted that for a couple of years, and then they went out of business. And then I also, then I went on and did a set of hostings at a tattoo parlor in Merrick on Sunrise Highway, Wild Child, which was loads of fun, and then they stopped. And then I got involved and asked the Hicksville Library to do it, and I've been going there for a little over, not quite 2 years, doing features where we have a feature come in and read, and then we have an open mic afterwards. And it's lots of fun. There's lots of new people, old people, and also, too, beyond just the poetry, we get a lot of people, with other venues,
They share information.
yeah, and they do fiction and nonfiction. They get between 4 and 5 minutes to read, and it's nice. You get a lot of different people.
So what gave you the confidence to go from writing the poetry to getting up in front of people and reading it?
I wanted to see if it was acceptable, if people liked what I did. I wanted to know that it was beyond just the small circle of my friends and family. And there was just one day I decided that I just was going to go, and I went to a Starbucks and I read.
Would you like to read something now?
Sure.
Okay.
Now, if you're a poet, you have 1,000 poems with you. On the off chance you get stuck in an airport, or you're in a shopping center, or this. Now, another very important part of my poetry reading and becoming a poet is the Walt Whitman birthplace in Huntington. I was able to I went to loads and a great deal of workshops and master classes, and it was great because I got to meet people like Mark Doty and C.K. Williams, and actually Robert Pinsky is going to be the poet that's going to do the master class this year. And it's people that you would never in a million years